When he entered the room, he didn't look that strange. In fact, he had a pleasant face with a nice smile, and it was obvious that he worked out regularly. But it was impossible to get past the blue spandex suit, the red cape, and of course the big S on his chest. For at least the 10th time, I quietly cursed my editor for assigning me to write a psycho story. She called me into her office a couple days ago. "Have you heard about the guy running around town in the Superman suit?" she asked me. "No," I replied. "Sounds like a psycho to me." "Quite possibly," she admitted, "but the geniuses in the city department think there might be a story in this, and they want us to get it." We tracked him down, and he agreed to an interview. "Guess who'll take it?" she said reproachfully. "Why do I always get the weird people?" I asked, raising my eyes to the sky, but I got the assignment anyway. Whoops! It all flashed through my mind as I got up to meet him. I could only hope it wouldn't be that bad. "I'm Ella Finn," I said, rising to shake his hand. "Alex Stevenson," he said, returning my handshake. "Nice to meet you." We sat down and I pulled out a tape recorder. "I'll be recording today's interview," I said. "Is that okay?" "Sure," he agreed easily. "No problem." I checked the microphone again to make sure it was on. "So, this is Elle Finn, a reporter for the New York Times, interviewing Alex Stevenson, aka Superman. Mr. Stevenson, let's get right to the point. Do you really believe you are the Man of Steel?" "I wish you'd call me Alex," he replied. "It would make things a lot friendlier." He smiled lightly and I nodded in agreement. "Anyway, to answer your question, I'll say that no, I'm far from a superhero." "So why are you wearing a suit?" I asked. His face took on a serious expression. "Probably because I didn't want to be vulnerable anymore." I tried not to react, but it wasn't what I expected. "It sounds like someone hurt you badly," I said cautiously. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He sighed slightly. "Okay," he said, and began to tell his story. The F train had that peculiar smell of dampness that you sometimes get in the summer, and I was glad when I finally reached my stop on Queens Boulevard. But once I descended the stairs into the relentless sunshine at street level, I almost wished I was back underground. By the time I reached our apartment, I was dying to get inside, under the air conditioning. Glenda usually got home before I did, but when I unlocked the door, the apartment was dark and quiet. After I cooled down and changed into shorts and a t-shirt, I went into the kitchen and started cooking dinner. When I heard the front door open, I called out to her. "Hey baby, I'm in the kitchen." "It's so hot. I thought it would be nice to make a salad for dinner. Do you mind?" She poked her head out from behind the doorframe. "Before you do that, would you mind coming out and talking to me?" "Sure," I said, and washed my hands, then walked into the combined living dining room. Glenda was sitting on the couch with her arms folded and her legs tucked up, as if she was freezing. Seeing the look on her face, I asked, "Everything okay, baby?" She raised her head but didn't look me in the eye as I lowered myself into the chair. "God," she said, "this is harder than I thought." Now I was concerned. "What's the matter, Glenda? What's wrong?" She took a deep breath, then exhaled sharply. "I don't know any other way to do this, Alex, so I'm going to be blunt. I want a divorce." "What?" I asked stupidly. "Is this a joke or something?" "No," she said quietly. "I'm not kidding. I'm going to file for divorce." I felt like I was in one of the bad novels I have to edit at work, except the characters usually have witty countermoves. I, on the other hand, had none. "But why? We have a good marriage. I don't want to get divorced. I love you." She shook her head impatiently, as if I were a child slowly learning lessons. "No, things haven't been this good for a long time. I could feel it, even if you didn't." She shifted on the couch and leaned forward as if trying to sell me something. "You didn't do anything, Alex. We just drifted apart. It's no one's fault. It just happens sometimes." I tried to protest, but she held up her hand. "Please don't," she said. "There's nothing you can say to make me change my mind." "I'll just pack my things and leave," she continued. I was still in a state of bewilderment. "You're leaving? Where are you going? Can't we talk about this?" She shook her head sadly. "I'm going to stay at a friend's house until we get things formalized here. Please, just accept it." Neither of us want to say anything that will make the situation any harder than it already is." With those words, she disappeared into our bedroom, and while I stood there in shock, she reappeared a surprisingly short time later, rolling her suitcase behind her. It was as if she'd already packed it and was waiting. "Please, Glenda, how about counseling? Can't we find someone?" She stepped around me and opened the door. "I'm sorry, Alex, I don't have anything to talk about. It has to be like this." With those words, she rolled her bag across the threshold and slammed the door behind her, leaving me standing in stunned silence. I slowly walked over to the couch and collapsed on it. In the novels I edit, the protagonist goes into a raging rage or goes to the nearest bar to get drunk or leaves to try to get laid. I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I sat in the encroaching darkness and tried to find answers to the questions swarming in my head. I just couldn't understand what had happened, much less why. My relationship with Glenda wasn't outstanding. We went to the same college and were part of a group that hung out with each other all 4 years we were there. Most of the time, neither of us dated each other. It was easier to do things as a group rather than as a couple. But in my senior year, Glenda started dating a guy who wasn't in our group, so we didn't see her as much as we used to. I think she was hoping he would propose, but he chose grad school in California, and they broke up at graduation. I was an English major and, like many others, wanted to go into publishing after graduation. So, like many others, I moved to New York City and started looking for a job. 500 resumes and 40 interviews later, I was working as a waiter and living with 5 friends in a 1-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood in Brooklyn. And then I got lucky. It turned out that my grandfather knew someone in the publishing business, and when he heard about my dreams, he approached me with a request. Eventually, I was able to land an internship with a real publishing company. The bad news was that the internship only paid minimum wage, so I still had to moonlight at night after I was released from my day job. The good news was that now I was actually working in the industry I aspired to and had the opportunity to learn what publishing was like from the inside. Now I was working 2 jobs and making 1 paltry salary, including tips. But the wonderful thing about being young is that you have both the energy and naivete to tolerate those conditions longer than anyone not in true slavery. On a Tuesday night, when I didn't have restaurant work, my roommates and I decided to head to a bar in Midtown Manhattan and spend some of our precious income on overpriced alcohol. While we were chatting raucously, I looked up and saw none other than Glenda Preston and her 2 girlfriends enter the bar. He stopped his narrative abruptly. "Can you not mention her name?" he asked. "Why?" I asked curiously. He looked at me a little embarrassed. I guess I'm still trying to make sense of it all. Somehow it seems like open warfare with her isn't going to help. I was surprised. It seems my psycho was deeper than I had realized. "Actually, it'll make it easier for me," I told him. "I won't have to track her down and find out her side of the story. What's more, this should be about Superman, not his ex-wife." All right, he said, and continued his story. Spotting her, I nearly knocked the beer bottle out of my roommate's hands as I rushed toward her. But as I approached her little cove, I stopped, suddenly hesitating. Would she be as glad to see me as I was to see her? But at that moment, she looked up and, spotting me, squealed, "Alex!" and rushed to hug me. We hugged, then she pulled away, looked at me carefully, and kissed me on the lips. I didn't understand where it came from, but I felt fine, so I didn't care. She put her arm around my waist and introduced me to her girlfriends. I, in turn, dragged them to meet my roommates, thus earning countless brownie points, since neither of us were that comfortable trying to pick up a girl. Glenda and I had a great time that night. It was like being back in college. Much later than I'd planned, we finally broke up for the night, and after exchanging phone numbers, she gave me another kiss full of promise. We started meeting every chance we got. The only difference was that this time, there was no group to distract us or smooth our interactions, and so the relationship seemed to move faster and burn hotter than I think either of us expected. One of the realities of living in poverty is how hard it is to find time and space to be alone together. My apartment was a disaster. One or more of my roommates would always show up out of nowhere, usually at the most inopportune moment. Even when I had pre-planned and reserved one of the 2 bedrooms for a few hours, someone would walk in unexpectedly, oblivious to our desire for privacy. Glenda's was a little better, because there were only 4 roommates, and they were all girls who understood and followed the rules of social etiquette much more scrupulously. Still, Their apartment was tiny and the interior walls were thin, so there was no real privacy, especially when we were in the throes of passion. Hearing giggles coming through the door was unpleasant enough, and hearing the constant comments on our liaison was just too much. Despite all the obstacles, our relationship continued to grow, and we talked about finding a place just for the two of us. But the realities of New York real estate and entry-level salaries made that just another rosy pipe dream, until fate intervened again. Out of the blue, there was a shakeup at the publishing house and a vacancy for a junior editor opened up. I must have made a good impression, because I was offered the job. The pay was about as much as I could make in a month as a waiter, but there were employee benefits, so I didn't hesitate to turn in my waiter's uniform and become a real book editor. No sooner had we celebrated my good fortune than Glenda was equally rich. She was moonlighting at Dennison and Lozer, one of the many large law firms in town, and when a paralegal position became available, they hired Glenda full-time. She was low on the totem pole too, but law firms paid more than publishing houses, and her starting salary was higher than mine. Moreover, when we added up our salaries, we realized that we had enough money to make our dream come true. After much searching, we found a small apartment on the 6th floor of an old building in Forest Hills. The only reason we could afford it was because the building was almost a mile from the nearest subway station. We rented it right away. After that, we went shopping for used furniture, and on moving day, I got down on one knee and presented Glenda with the ring my parents' loan allowed me to buy. From the look on Glenda's face, you would have thought it was a Hope diamond. The first few years of our marriage were good. Although our funds were extremely limited, we found ways to enjoy the Big Apple and each other. Because we were so far from Brooklyn, I lost touch with my old roommates, but made new friends among the other junior editors at the publisher. Soon a small group of us would get together for lunch or happy hour, and it was a lot like my old college gang. Glenda kept in touch with her roommates, but didn't seem to make that many friends at the law firm, probably because it was pretty stuffy, at least as far as I could tell. But if her job wasn't a source of social opportunity, it was definitely rewarding from a career standpoint. Glenda showed a real aptitude for legal matters, and her talent was recognized and rewarded. She began to be given more challenging assignments, which she enjoyed doing, and upon successful performance, she was promoted and moved to a higher partner in the firm. This inevitably led to longer working hours, but she was happy for the opportunity to show what she could do, and I was happy for her. And that brought me back to tonight and Glenda's sudden, incomprehensible departure. I went to the refrigerator, pulled out a 6-pack of beer, and returned to the couch to try to figure out what had happened. I hadn't expected this turn of events. Sure, we no longer had that feeling of first love that I can't bear to tear myself away from you for a minute, but no one stays that way forever. Sure, our jobs have kept us apart more and more lately, but isn't that the price you have to pay to succeed? What drove me crazy was that we had no major fights, no clash of goals or values, nothing that could explain her decision. Okay, I'll admit that there were times when she was intolerant of our standard of living, but I felt the same way. And anyway, weren't we on a path that would eventually lead us to more of the things we wanted? Glenda was already moving in that direction, and once one of the seniors, that's what we called the senior editors at my company, finally decided to retire, I'd be in line for a nice promotion too. So what was the problem? The more I recounted the events and the longer I drank, the more chaotic my emotions became. I became despondent at the thought of my marriage falling apart. I loved Glenda, and it hurt like hell to find out that she no longer loved me. What was I supposed to tell my parents? They loved Glenda too and were looking forward to having grandchildren. The thought infuriated me. How could she be so impulsive and selfish? Did she not realize how many people she was hurting, starting with me? This, of course, made me depressed again about her inexplicable departure. I staggered back to the bedroom and collapsed on our double bed, not bothering to undress. Fuck it, I thought drunkenly. It doesn't matter anyway. The problem with beer is that it creates an undeniable need for relief, so strong that it woke me up early in the morning and made me go to the bathroom. I barely made it, and emptying my bladder was so painful that I almost screamed. When I finally finished, I found that I was already awake. My stomach felt like I had drunk battery acid, and at the same time, I felt like I hadn't eaten in a day, which I realized was almost true. Swearing, I surrendered to the inevitable, got up, showered, and shaved. Then I headed toward the subway station and walked into a small coffee shop to get breakfast. There was only one other customer there at that hour. Likewise, when I got to the office, I was the first person there. I tried to immerse myself in my work, but my thoughts kept returning to what had happened. Not knowing why she'd left kept me in suspense, and as time went on, I grew angrier and angrier. I finally convinced myself that I deserved answers, and I decided to act. Glenda and I never went to see each other during work hours. Our business was sacred, not to be disturbed. Today was an exception. I knew when Glenda usually went to lunch, and carefully timed my visit so that I would arrive just before she left. I even splurged on a cab to her office so I wouldn't be late. When I walked into the Dennison and Lauser law office, I didn't recognize the receptionist, but since I met very few people there, that didn't surprise me. "Hi," I said. "I'm Alex Stevenson, Glenda Preston's husband. I've come to ask her to lunch." The receptionist looked up at me with astonished eyes. "Okay, I'll just call her and let her know you're here." No, I said hastily. "It's a surprise. I'll just go back for her." She looked at me doubtfully, but I walked confidently past the counter to the front door, and she obediently let me pass through. As I walked through the aisles, I thought I noticed a few curious looks, but I ignored them and headed straight for Glenda's stall. She was chatting with another young woman, but when she saw me, she stopped abruptly and her face went pale. "What are you doing, Alex?" she demanded. "You can't be here. I'm working." "Well, I'm here," I said belligerently, "and I intend to stay here until you tell me why you left me last night." "Keep your voice down," she hissed at me, her face turning bright red. "I explained to you last night why I was leaving." I was getting more and more angry. "You didn't explain anything. You just told me a bunch of platitudes that don't mean anything." She looked around, and I realized that we had attracted a small crowd. Other people working in the area clustered around her in a semicircle, as if to help her fend off an attack. I was embarrassed, but I couldn't back down. Realizing that a confrontation could not be avoided, Glenda seemed to jump at the opportunity. "You want to know why I left you?" she said, making no attempt to lower her voice. "Well, I'll tell you, I'm leaving you because you're a nobody. You're a weak little man hanging on to your pathetic job, hoping that someday someone will die and you'll get a promotion. You're boring and uninteresting, you've gotten fat and sloppy. That's why I'm leaving you." I stood there in shock with my mouth open. I felt like I had been punched in the face. Who was that woman? "But," I objected weakly, "you didn't say anything before." "Well, I just did, loser," she snapped back. "And you want to know something else? You suck in bed and not in a good way." "Ooh, great," I heard someone exclaim in the crowd. I was stunned, and my pride was wounded. "Well, screw you," I said firmly. She only laughed. "Screw you? You work for a publishing company and screw you is the best you can do? That's just pathetic!" "Ouch! That's gotta hurt!" came another voice from behind, and the whole group burst into laughter. Humiliated, I glared at her, then turned and walked out, continuing to laugh. When I walked through the door into the reception area, the receptionist looked up in surprise. "Aren't you going to lunch with Glenda?" she asked. "No," I replied curtly. "Oh," she said and smiled broadly. "Well, have a good day." Luckily, the elevator door opened at that moment, and I rushed inside in time to escape. There was no hope of me getting any work done in time, not after all that, so I called the office and told them that some of the things I had eaten I didn't like. Then I got on the subway at Queens Station and headed home. After changing into jeans and a t-shirt, I went downstairs and went for a walk to Flushing Meadows and the Old World's Fair site. I found a place to sit near the Unisphere, and as I looked at the huge metal sculpture of the globe, I wondered what had just happened to me. I'd never heard Glenda complain about any of the things she'd accused me of in her office today. Sure, I was ambitious, but I was also smart enough to realize that opportunities don't come along very often in the publishing business. What's wrong with being patient? And that rant about my sexual activity, it was a low blow, literally. She never once complained. Besides, I was sure she often had orgasms when we had sex. But if she wasn't satisfied, I'd be happy to do more or try something different, if only she'd mention it. Nevertheless, I had to admit that her insult shook me to the core. I looked down at myself and noticed an incipient roll of fat around my waist. Damn! I had let myself get sloppy. When I was in college, I kept myself in pretty good shape, but the fat around my middle was something I couldn't deny. Beer and bar food, I thought with guilt. I immediately made a vow to myself. Join a gym, give up alcohol. After Glenda's scathing assessment of me today, I was under no illusions that I could win her back, and I didn't want to, for that matter. But I could damn sure show her that I could change if she'd only give me a chance. I pulled out my smartphone and found a gym near my office. It wasn't cheap, but I figured the fact that I could save money on beer would help me get by. I went back to work the next morning, bringing my gym bag with me, and for the next 2 weeks I went to work out every day after work. My muscles ached, but not as much as my ego and, I'll admit, my heart. Even if Glenda had turned into some kind of harpy, I couldn't fall out of love overnight with the woman who had recently been my wife. The other junior editors beckoned me to join them on their after-work walks, but I dodged them, making one excuse or another to get out of it. I didn't want to tell them I'd given up alcohol, I didn't want them to know I went to the gym every day now, and most of all, I didn't want to admit the reason why. But of course, I was a fool to think I could keep up this facade for long. Anyway, one afternoon I got a call from Candy at the front desk informing me that I had a visitor. As I walked outside, I saw a man I was sure I had never met before. Nevertheless, he smiled pleasantly at me and asked, "Alex Stevenson?" "Yes," said I curiously. He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Stevenson, you have been served." With those words, he bowed to Candy, turned and walked away. Candy had already outlived several husbands, so she knew exactly what had happened. Even if she didn't, the look on my face would have been obvious to her. "Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know you and Glenda were having problems." I nodded at her words and turned to walk back to my desk, not trusting my voice to say anything. Sure, I had expected something like this, but the finality of the divorce decree still made a strong impression on me. The envelope lay unopened on my desk as the clock struck 5 o'clock, and my 3 best friends from work stood in front of me. "Let's go, Alex," Marie said, grabbing my hand. "You're coming with us." I tried to protest, but the 3 of them wouldn't settle down, and I didn't have the strength to resist. When we got to the bar, they all looked at each other when I ordered a soda with lemon, but no one said anything. Finally, Jacob took the bull by the horns. "Okay, Alex, Candy told us about what happened today." "Come on, spill it. What happened between you and Glenda?" And I did. I wasn't going to wash my dirty laundry in front of my friends, but it had been festering inside me for so long that once I started, everything came out, even the details of my humiliating meeting with Glenda in her office. "That bitch!" Tommy exclaimed. "Must have slept with Connor. Ouch!" He turned to Marie with an accusing look. "What did you kick me for?" But I paid no attention to their bickering and grabbed onto what Tommy was saying. "Slept with Connor? Are you talking about Connor James from her law firm? What does he have to do with Glenda?" I demanded. "Well, after we saw him sucking on her face, it was pretty obvious. Ouch! Damn it, Marie, that really hurts! Don't you know when to keep your mouth shut?" Marie hissed at Tommy as he stood rubbing his shin. Then she turned to me with an apologetic look on her face. "I'm sorry, Alex. Back in March, the 3 of us went out to dinner, and then we walked into a bar and saw them together. From the way they were acting, it was pretty obvious what was going on. I made a few quick mental calculations. No, it couldn't be her. She took night classes back in March." "Oh yes," Jacob picked up on that. "She took night classes." Then he saw the angry look in Marie's eyes and took a quick step back to avoid getting under her foot. "Don't any of you ever think before you speak?" she asked in frustration. She turned to face me again. "Alex, that wasn't the only time. The 2 of them weren't exactly outspoken. Now I was not only angry but humiliated. You knew and you didn't tell me? What kind of friends are you?" Marie took my hand. "Come on, Alex, it's not that simple. We didn't know what was really going on, and neither of us wanted to spread rumors. Besides, they were so blatant about it, we thought maybe you knew and—" "You thought I knew and didn't mind?" I asked in amazement. "I can't believe it!" I headed for the door, but Jacob grabbed my arm. "Look, kid, the truth is, if any of us told you about this, you'd deny everything and start hating us. You know it's true. Everybody shoots the messenger. Deep down, I knew he was right, but that didn't make me feel any better. Being humiliated enough in front of Glenda's co-workers to become a cuckold in front of my friends was beyond me. It was the coup de grace, the ultimate wound." Alex looked up at me, confused but defiant. Anyway, that's when I decided to start wearing the Superman costume. I was so engrossed in his story that I had to shake myself out of my reverie. I'd been dumped before and it was painful, but Alex's experience must have been much more painful and humiliating. I went back into reporter mode. But I still don't get it, Alex. How did you go from abandoned husband to Superman costume? He continued his story. I wasn't sure I could handle going back to work, but the next morning I forced myself to go to the gym because exercise seemed like the only way to take my mind off everything else. It didn't work that morning. All I could think about was wanting to hide, become invisible, or turn into someone else. Eventually, I gave up and left. On my way to the office, I passed a bookstore. There were books and posters about superheroes in the window. As a kid, I loved comic books and cartoons and had seen almost every movie about comic book characters. Like all kids, I dreamed of becoming a superhero. Now, in my desperate state of mind, these memories came upon me with renewed vigor. Then I remembered the previous Halloween when I went to a costume party wearing a Batman costume. It was just a cheap mask and costume, but I felt good wearing it and enjoyed the party immensely. But now the superhero I envied was Superman because he couldn't be harmed. After all the pain and humiliation I had endured, the idea of being invulnerable seemed extremely desirable. I guess a lot of things came together in me at the same time. My life was miserable and I wanted to be someone else. I felt weak and helpless and I wanted to be strong. Moreover, I felt vulnerable and didn't want to be hurt. I know I probably sound crazy. And to be honest, I really knew that wearing the Superman costume wouldn't make bullets bounce off me. I just wanted to feel like that for a little while, even if it wasn't real. I just felt so awful that I felt like I had to try something, even the craziest thing, to make myself feel better. Anyway, at that moment it felt like the right thing to do, and I did it. When he stopped talking, I decided I needed to change gears. Okay, so how did you get your suit? He brightened. There's a small tailoring shop between my apartment and the subway station. It's run by a wonderful old seamstress named Golda Mermelstein. So on my way home, I stopped by and told her what I needed. She listened silently while I described what I needed, then took out a tape measure and started taking measurements, as if what I was asking for was a regular thing. Come back in a week, she said in a thick Yiddish accent. That's how I got my suit, he concluded. She did an amazing job. He stood up, turned around so I could admire Mrs. Mermelstein's work, and I realized that my first impression had been correct. Alex was indeed quite trim. The elastic material fit him snugly, and I admired the work for a moment. He coughed politely, and I realized I'd been staring at him for too long. I quickly grabbed my notebook and went through the notes I had prepared. Why don't you tell me about the first time you put on the suit? I asked. He sat back down. The following Saturday, I decided to wear it for the first time. It was the scariest night of my life. He grinned in surprise. You know, it wasn't easy the first time. I have a newfound liking for women who wear tights. But anyway, when I put them on, it felt pretty nice, kind of like sportswear. Besides, I told myself, it would take forever to get out of them again, so I might as well go for it. As I walked toward the subway, I noticed a few people looking at me, but no one said anything. I guess in New York they are used to seeing strange people walking down the street. But I noticed that when I went down to the subway platform to wait, all the people around me moved away. The same thing happened when I entered the subway car. No one sat next to me or looked at me. But after a while, I noticed a little girl about 6 years old who was riding with her mom. She looked at me and suddenly ran up and asked, "Are you Superman?" I could see that her mother was starting to panic and I didn't want to scare her, so I kept my hands at my side and smiled at the girl. "No," I told her, "I'd just like to dress up as Superman sometimes." Then, before her mother could pull her away from me, I asked, "Do you like to play dress-up?" The girl looked at me triumphantly. "Oh yes, but I like to dress up like a princess." With those words, she raised her arms above her head and twirled like a ballerina. I smiled again and started asking her about being a princess. Her mother watched me carefully, but I noticed that the tension on her face had subsided a bit. I also noticed some of the other passengers watching us and even caught a couple smiles from them. The girl and I chatted until I reached my stop. I slowly stood up, trying not to make any sudden movements. I should get going. I waved my hand lightly at her. "Bye-bye, princess." She waved back at me. "Bye-bye, Superman." As I stepped down onto the platform, The little girl's mom smiled slightly at me, and I nodded my appreciation. I felt very good. But there was an even bigger challenge ahead of me. I decided to see what it was like to be in a crowd of people, so I planned to go to a popular night spot and hang out there. When I got to the door, I saw it was full of people, and I hesitated. Then I thought, Superman wouldn't be afraid to go in there. He'd walk in there like he owned the place. So I pushed the door open and walked in. As I walked toward the bar, I heard the noise diminish as I passed groups of people. As soon as I passed them, a sort of hum filled the silence, and I realized that people were wondering what they would think of me. But the bartender was calm when he noticed me, and calmly asked for my order as if it happened every night. My request for a soda and lime didn't evoke even a shadow of surprise. As I stood there sipping my drink, the guy standing next to me rubbed me on the shoulder. "So are you doing a movie or something?" he asked. "No," I told him. "I just wanted to do it to try something different." "Okay, cool," he said and started to turn away. I was relieved. I'm usually pretty introverted, but I figured if I'd gotten this far, I might as well push a little further. "So you're a fan of the Superman movies?" I asked, and soon we were chatting about comic book hero movies. Other people around us began to join in, and we had a great time discussing the relative merits of various action heroes. Finally, the woman next to me pulled out her cell phone to take a picture of me, and when I saw the time, I was surprised. I was having such a good time that I didn't notice it was getting late. I paid off the bartender, leaving him a good tip, and headed for the exit. As I was getting to the door, someone in the crowd called out, "Good night, Superman," and a few people joined in. I turned, waved, and swung my cape to the laughter and cheers of the crowd. Nothing else happened on the subway to Queens, but when I walked into my apartment, I felt so good that I stayed up late to take off my Superman costume because the whole experience was so positive. Later, when I got into bed, I realized that for the first time I had spent an entire evening without thinking about Glenda. After that, I started wearing the suit almost every weekend, and in the evenings too. Most people liked it when they saw me in it, and I found that I didn't feel so vulnerable anymore. And it was a great conversation piece. Alex smiled at me, and I couldn't help but smile back. I guess I was happy for him, but I suspected that while his life in the superhero costume had started out well, it might have a dark side. It remained to be seen. "Okay," I said. "I think that's enough interviews for today. I'll want to ask you some questions again later, but we need to go to the park to take some pictures." My editor arranged for one of our staff photographers to take some shots of Alex in his suit in Central Park. For one thing, there were some nice backdrops there that would make for good photos. In addition, Alex had told us that he often went there, and we were hoping that we could get some shots of him interacting with people. The two of us got into a cab, and the cab driver couldn't take his eyes off Alex's suit. To my surprise, Alex started to engage in conversation with him, and soon the two of them were discussing the merits of capes. "My father wore a cape in the old country," the driver said, and Alex remarked that they were surprisingly comfortable. I tried not to roll my eyes, but I have to admit I found it a little endearing when Alex shook the cabbie's hand and wished him well. The older man responded just as warmly, and I realized that I had just witnessed Alex making a new friend. Very interesting. I was going to offer to pose Alex on one of the park's arched bridges, but the photographer wanted him to stand on a granite ledge that really looked dramatic. At the right angle, you could even see the Dakota twin protrusions rising above the tree line in the distance. Alex was clearly enjoying himself, moving and posing as directed by the photographer, but not looking unnatural or awkward. He really feels at home in that suit, I thought, and slightly envied his nonchalance. Suddenly, a child's voice called out, "Hey, Superman!" And I saw Alex genuinely excited. In an instant, he jumped off the boulder and went over to greet a group of half a dozen or so teenage boys, calling some of them by name. Soon they were sitting on the grass in a ring around Alex, listening to him tell a story about Superman that I was sure he'd made up himself. At last, a mother's voice came from the other end of the field, and all the boys jumped up and ran off, laughing and waving at Alex. "Sorry about that," he said, coming back to us. "I've met these kids here before, so I couldn't just brush them off. Besides, I really like kids. I'd like to have a couple myself." Then his face lost its smile for a moment, and I realized he was thinking about his failed marriage. I couldn't help it. My heart clenched. But soon he brushed that mood away, and his smile returned. I turned to speak to the photographer. "Did you get everything you needed?" I asked. Oh yes, she said enthusiastically. The poses on the rocks were great. And I got lots of good shots while he was telling stories to the kids. Then she looked at me strangely and whispered, "Is this guy real?" I shook my head. I wish I knew. I walked up to him again. You were great with the kids, and it seemed to go well at the bar that night you told me about. But don't people ever laugh at you or make fun of you? I asked. Oh, sure, he said casually. Often. But I just wave and smile at them and they don't bother me. He looked at me shrewdly. I have a way of dealing with things like that. When something unpleasant happens, I ask myself, what would Superman do? For example, if someone started making fun of Superman, it wouldn't bother him one bit. He knows who he is and what he can do, and their remarks bounce off him like bullets. I had my doubts. What if people don't want to talk to someone wearing a suit? Don't you think you sometimes push people away? I guess so, he said thoughtfully. But if they don't want to deal with me, that's fine. I'm not trying to impose myself on others. I'm just trying to live like everyone else. Just doing it differently. He saw that I was skeptical and suddenly perked up. Hey, I have an idea. Are you doing anything tomorrow night? When I admitted that I had no plans, he got excited. Instead of another job interview, why don't you come with me? We'll go somewhere and you can see for yourself what it's like. When I hesitated, he leaned across the table to me impatiently. Come on, it'll be fun. What have you got to lose? It was starting to turn into something more than I expected, but I knew what my editor would want me to do, and besides, his enthusiasm was infectious. Okay, I'll do it, I told him, and he looked genuinely pleased. Back at my apartment that evening, I told Terry, my roommate, about my strange interview. She, too, thought he sounded like another psycho. When I told her I accepted his invitation to go out with him the next night, she only rolled her eyes. Come on, Ella, she said. Can't you find a normal guy to go out with? I laughed, but her words hurt me a little. I'd had a few bad encounters, and Terry knew I was intimidating. Of course, Terry considered herself more my guardian angel than my roommate, but I appreciated her concern for me. Unsurprisingly, I was a little worried the next night when the cab dropped me off at the bar where I was supposed to meet Alex. I had no idea what to expect, and the fact that Alex was nowhere to be seen didn't improve my mood. But suddenly I heard my name being called, and I turned around to see Alex in his Superman costume speeding down the sidewalk toward me. It'll be fun, he said with a confident smile, and taking my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, he led me inside. As soon as we passed through the door, I heard the tone of the background noise change. People were pointing at each other and talking, and I started to feel very uncomfortable. But Alex immediately ducked into the crowd and led me behind him to the bar. The bartender noticed Alex and called out loudly, "Superman is in the house." Immediately, the room filled with cheers and applause, and the level of excitement seemed to rise. After checking with me, Alex ordered me a glass of white wine, and I saw with interest that he had actually gotten a soda for himself. As soon as the drinks arrived, he took my hand and dragged me toward a large gathering of people on one side of the hall. As we walked, people kept reaching out to shake his hand or greet him. I was getting more than my share of curious stares, and I began to realize that being with Alex meant being around a small celebrity. Alex joined the conversation like a child jumping into a pool on a hot day. He would instantly engage in a discussion with almost anyone within earshot, and I marveled at the ease with which he participated. As I watched what was happening, several things caught my eye. First, although he actively engaged in the conversation, he was careful not to dominate it. Instead, he kept asking for other people's opinions, and when he seemed to disagree with them, he would simply turn to someone else and ask for their opinion. Secondly, he was consistently friendly, smiling at people and giving them positive feedback, making them feel good about themselves. Finally, even though I was only there as a passive observer, he made an effort to involve me in the process, and I couldn't help but appreciate his sensitivity. He was easy to communicate with. Another thing I soon learned was that Alex never stood still for long periods of time. He kept circulating through the crowd, talking to new people as they came into his sphere of communication, and then moving on in a completely natural way. I was surprised to find myself enjoying the evening. I expected to be a fly on the wall, observing and making mental notes for my article. Instead, I found myself talking to people much more than usual and enjoying it. I also found myself drinking a few more glasses of white wine, which probably contributed to even more conversation. At one point at the end of the evening, a rather attractive blonde woman squeezed her way through the crowd. She approached Alex and, pointing at me, asked demandingly, "Is this your date?" Alex turned to me with a smile on his face and asked, "I don't know, Ella. Are you my date?" I blushed and quickly replied, "No, I'm just a friend." "Good," the blonde said, and then began brazenly caressing the front of Alex's swim trunks. "So why don't you and I go back to my place and find out if you really are a man of steel?" she asked insistently. Alex blushed even harder than I did and quickly removed her hand. "Sorry, but I'm all business today." Her face reflected disappointment, but she wasn't ready to give up. "We could do that too, you know." When Alex shook his head with a smile, she said, "That's your defeat, superhero," and walked off in her stilettos with a disgruntled expression on her face. Alex leaned over to speak quietly in my ear. "Looks like the locals are getting restless," he said with a wry smirk. "Maybe we should call it a night." I froze from this little interlude and realized with surprise that approaching the aggressive woman made me jealous, so I was glad when Alex took my hand and started to lead me to the door. And then what I was so afraid of happened. A huge man, clearly drunk, stepped out of the crowd directly into our path. He stared at Alex and grinned as if Alex had insulted him. "So you're the wimp who thinks he's a superhero," he growled, and the crowd around us fell silent. Clinging to Alex, I watched the two other rough-looking men close ranks behind the giant and fumbled for my cell phone, wanting to be ready to call 911 if chaos broke out. To his credit, Alex didn't flinch. "I'm the one wearing the Superman costume," he said in an even tone, "but I'm far from a superhero." The big guy squinted at him. "If you're not a superhero, why the fuck are you wearing a Superman costume?" he demanded belligerently. "Do you really want to know?" Alex asked with a solemn expression on his face, and I couldn't help but wonder what was on his mind. Was he deliberately trying to provoke the big man? I was horrified. "I wouldn't ask you if I didn't want to know, smartass," growled the big guy. Alex leaned over to him and said quietly, "My wife cheated on me with another man. She ran away and broke my heart and humiliated me. I put on a suit to protect myself because I don't want to be hurt like that again." The big guy looked at Alex for a long time, and then he did something I never would have thought he would do. He wrapped his arms around Alex and hugged him. "Damn, man, I know how you feel." My wife did the same thing to me. He then let go of Alex, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Take care of yourself, you hear?" With those words, he stepped aside, opening a path for us to the door. Behind us, someone shouted, "Good night, Superman!" And as others picked up on that cry, we left the building. On the sidewalk, I started to shake. "Oh my God, Alex, I thought he was going to kill you," I said in a shaky voice. Alex looked at me triumphantly. "I thought so too," he said. Then his smile returned, and he said, "Let's go get something to eat." I let him lead me to the late-night diner, and after we ordered, I started babbling. "What made you say that to that guy?" I wanted to know. "How did you know he would react like that?" Alex shook his head. "I had no idea what he was going to do. I just figured that Superman wouldn't try to wriggle out of the situation, but would tell the truth and see what came of it." "Yeah," I said, "but Superman couldn't get hurt. This guy could have blown your head off." Alex smiled sadly. "You're probably right, but I was already in pain, and I thought, who cares what happens again?" I took a bite out of my sandwich to give myself time to think. I was beginning to realize how seriously injured this man was, and how much he was relying on the nominal protection of his suit. I decided to change the subject. "I was impressed with how easily you were able to get all those people talking. You should run for political office." "No," he answered immediately. "I'm not interested. I'm just learning to enjoy talking to people." I shook my head. "How many of those people at the bar do you know?" I asked curiously. He smiled. "None of them. The only one I recognized was the bartender." I found that hard to believe. "How did you learn to make conversation with strangers so easily?" He shook his head. "That's funny, Elle. All my life I've been shy around people. Back in high school, I stuck to crowds because I didn't feel confident alone. In a group, I could just react to what everyone else was saying. The traces of a smile at the corners of his mouth disappeared from his face. After Glenda left, things got a lot worse. I didn't want to see anyone or be with anyone. I just wanted to dig a hole and crawl into it. But after I started wearing the Superman costume, it became much easier for me to go out on my own and meet new people and talk to them. I just thought about how Superman handled the situation and tried to act the same way. The image of a shy and indecisive Alex didn't fit in any way with the extrovert I'd observed just a few minutes ago, so I broached the subject. Maybe the suit helped you come out of your shell, I said. But that doesn't explain how you learned to talk to people like that. It's not a big deal, he said. I really like people, I just never felt comfortable around them. Now I do, and I want to know what they think and how they feel. I feel good and I want them to feel good too. I didn't say anything back, but all I could think was, there's a lot more to this guy than I thought. At that moment, a woman walked into the diner, and it made me think of my encounter with the predatory blonde again. I asked Alex about the incident. Do things like this happen often? I inquired. He was visibly embarrassed. Yes, he admitted. It's happened a few times. Did you go home with any of them? Demanded I. He didn't look at me. A couple times, maybe. So, how did it go? I asked before I could close my mouth. What was I thinking asking a question like that? But before I could back away, he was already answering. It was the first time I hadn't been with a woman since Glenda left, and I guess I really wanted to. He laughed lightly. After that, she accused me of being faster than a bullet. But then it got better, he continued ingenuously. I just kept reminding myself that Superman could control himself, and girls started liking me more. But pretty soon I got to the point where getting laid didn't seem so appealing anymore. He looked at me with pain in his eyes. I guess I'm old-fashioned. All I wanted was one woman if she was the right one. I thought Glenda was like that, but it turned out to be different. He glanced suddenly at the clock above the counter. Do you need to go home? He asked thoughtfully, and looking at the time, I was shocked at how late it was already. He walked me to the curb and caught a cab for me. I guess a raincoat fluttering in the wind comes in handy sometimes. While the cabbie eyed him, Alex opened the door and helped me inside. Thanks, Ella, he said. I know it was just for your article, but I really enjoyed being with you tonight. Then he closed the door, and as the cab pulled away, I looked back and saw him standing on the curb. The cabbie turned to look at me. Who was that? He asked curiously. I'm still not sure I know, I said. When I got home, Terry was waiting for me, and she wanted to know all about my evening. After I finished talking about the night's adventures, she asked what I thought of Alex. When I told her about how badly he'd been hurt, she gave me a hard look. He may have had a hard time because of his ex-wife, but he's not a lost kitten, Ella. You don't need to give him shelter and a bowl of milk, you know? I know, I said, but it was hard for me to stop thinking about him and everything he'd been through. When I sat down to write an article about Alex, I found it very difficult to get started. On the one hand, recounting the experiences Alex shared with me would be easy, and what I observed in the park and at the bar would definitely make a great piece. But I found myself struggling to convey what was really going on inside Alex. One question every reader would like an answer to is why a seemingly normal guy would do such a seemingly irrational act. I reread the article several times before I came up with a headline I liked. Heartbroken superhero seemed to me to best capture the controversy, and once I realized that the rest flowed easily. When I got the assignment, I was sure it would be a waste of time and my work would be ruined. But after a tumultuous day and night with Alex, and another day spent trying to describe what was really going on inside him, I began to take great care of my paper. I didn't want it to end up in the Spike, and I was terrified when I finally turned it in to the editor. An hour later, she called me. "Do you have more?" she asked gruffly. "What do you mean?" asked I irritably. "It's already the right length." I carefully edited the article down to the standard length for the city section. I consider myself a serious writer, and I realized that if I didn't edit my work, someone else would start editing it and ruin what I had done. "It's not suitable for Sunday Magazine," she said, and I sighed. An article in Sunday Magazine can be much longer. What's more, the articles that appear there tend to get a lot of attention, and unlike the daily articles, they stay on the Times website all week long. I was shocked. Pleasantly shocked, of course, but still. I went back to the computer and started pulling up all the material I had cut out. With the luxury of all those lovely extra column inches, I quickly began to revise what I had, turning it from a news item into a feature story. I kept the basic idea, but now, freed from the inverted pyramid style, allowed the story to flow much more organically. By the end of the day, I had finished the piece, and my editor was quite pleased. "It's really good, Ella," she told me, "and you managed to submit it in time for the Sunday edition." I felt like I'd hit a grand slam. In the evening, I did something I shouldn't have done. I called Alex and told him to check the Sunday Times magazine this weekend. "So it won't be on the daily news?" he asked uncertainly. "Is that good or bad?" "Oh, that's definitely a good thing," I said. "You'll see." After I hung up the phone, however, I began to have my doubts. What I'd turned in to the editor was a positive, honest human interest story, and I thought it captured Alex very well. But that didn't mean the finished product would turn out that way. What if some higher-up editor decided to turn the story into a humor piece mocking Alex, or worse, making fun of him? I've seen that happen before, and the result could be pretty brutal. If it happened, he'd think I'd written it that way. The more I thought about it, the more I wished I hadn't called him. Reporters are supposed to keep their distance from their subjects, to be impartial. If they don't, they lose objectivity, and then it's no longer reporting. But damn it, I found that I couldn't help but like Alex, and if my article turned into a rant, I'd feel terrible. Besides, I admitted to myself, I'd probably never see the guy again. While that was still unlikely, it would be nice to think it was possible. I had deliberately avoided perusing the magazine beforehand, but when my own copy of the Times showed up on my doorstep, I quickly reached for the magazine section. There, on the cover, a picture of Alex standing on a boulder in Central Park stared back at me with smiling eyes and a hard expression. Underneath it was the headline, "Queen Superhero with a Broken Heart." OMG, my story made the cover! I quickly switched to the article under my author title and started reading. No, I was relieved to see that they hadn't turned my article into a parody. Moreover, the more I read, the more I realized that they had used it almost exactly as I had written it. Not only that, they had used it, all of it, my whole damn article. Wow! I sat there in my pajamas and felt great. Getting the cover story was an amazing coup that a reporter like me could only dream of. And then another thought struck me. I wanted Alex to read the article and tell me he liked it. Where did that come from? I wondered. After reading the article, Terry only shook her head. "You're doing it again, Elle. This guy is damaged. I don't want you to get hurt." I ignored her. On Monday, I received numerous congratulatory phone calls, but I hadn't heard from Alex. I realized that he had no particular reason to call, but I grew more wary every day. Maybe he had a different reaction to the article, I thought. Or maybe he took offense at my attempts to give a balanced view of him. Or maybe, I thought sadly, he just wasn't interested in talking to me again. I was deep in self-pity when my cell phone rang. It was Alex. "Hi, Ella," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't call you sooner, but things have been crazy around here. None of my friends at work can believe it's me. My mom from Illinois even called. I don't know how she found out about it. She's worried about me," he said with a laugh. "She thinks I've lost my mind." He kept talking nonsense while I tried to get a word in edgewise. Finally, he paused to catch his breath, and I took advantage of the moment. "So," I said, "what do you think of the article?" "Oh, that was," he said, then paused, and I heard him talking to someone else for a few seconds before he got back on the line. "Look, that was my boss, so I should get going. But before I do, I was wondering if you could have lunch with me on Wednesday. Then we can talk more about it." "Sure, I guess," I said, trying not to give away my impatience. "Great!" he enthused and gave me the name of a small establishment on 8th Avenue, not far from my office. "I'll see you Wednesday at noon," he said, and left. As I hung up the phone, I wished we'd had time to talk more about the article, but it didn't sound like he was unhappy with it. Anyway, I thought, at least he wants to see me again. Turning back to the computer screen, I saw a slight smile in his reflection. On Wednesday, I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes earlier than usual, but when I looked inside, Alex was already there, and he was wearing a Superman costume. I wasn't expecting that. He was chatting animatedly with some man when I walked in, But when he spotted me, he shook his hand like they were old friends and then rushed over to me. He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, then led me back to the table. "Who was that man?" I asked curiously. "Oh, that was the restaurant owner. When he saw me come in wearing a suit, he came over and wanted to talk to me," Alex explained nonchalantly, as if such things happened to him every day. Then his face took on an expression of great animation. "You won't believe what's happening to me," he said, with the enthusiasm of a little boy. "I was telling you about my friends at work and how surprised they were to read about me. Anyway, they adamantly demanded that I wear a suit to work on Tuesday. I didn't even think about it because I really want to be taken seriously at my job, and I was afraid of what the reaction would be. But they kept insisting, and eventually I decided the hell with it." He paused as the waitress brought our food, then quickly continued his story in between bites. "Anyway, when I came in Tuesday morning, my friends started raging, and then my supervisor walked in. I was horrified, but she just stared at me for a minute. Then she snorted and said, 'Okay, I guess you can wear that thing, but if it detracts from the work environment, you're going to have to change.' I was shocked. I thought she would be furious about it. But the fact that she didn't freak out made me feel even more confident. After lunch, I decided to take another gamble. I did something I'd wanted to do for a long time, but hadn't dared to do before I put on the suit." He leaned across the table to me, and his enthusiasm was palpable. Every week, publishers receive dozens of unsolicited manuscripts from aspiring writers. They just get tossed in the garbage can, and most are ignored or sent an automated thank you, but no thank you letter, he explained. But I started looking through some of them to see what they were about, and found one that seemed really good. Beginning authors are usually terrible. They use bad grammar and come up with trite or ridiculous plots. But this book was so much better, and I really thought it had everything I needed to be a good salesman. I was afraid to take it to Mrs. Grissom, my boss, because junior editors don't do that. He flashed his wide grin at me. Anyway, on Tuesday I decided to act more like Superman than myself. After lunch I went to her office and handed her the manuscript. After she told me to stop wasting her time, I said, "Mrs. Grissom, just take this home and read the first couple of chapters. If I've really wasted your time, then you should fire me because I clearly don't have the right talent for the job." I tried not to show my reaction, but my insides clenched. What Alex was describing was something I often dreamed of, because I always wanted to become a serious writer. I'd even written a novel, but I'd never tried to submit it anywhere because I knew it wasn't good enough. To hide my envy, I said, "You didn't really do it, did you, Alex? I know how much you love your job. You take a lot of risks." He grinned crookedly. "Maybe so, but I really believe in it, and I figured it was better to take the risk than to be in constant fear of failure." "So what happened?" I wanted to know. "Nothing yet," he said. "Mrs. Grissom is out of town and won't be back until Friday." "Oh my God," I said. "I'm going to be nervous waiting to see what she thinks." "That's why I wanted to have lunch with you today, so I could have something more pleasant on my mind." I blushed in spite of myself. I knew it was just flattery, but it still felt good. And then he said something that made me feel even better. "There's another reason I wanted to see you today. One of the big online booksellers is throwing a swanky cocktail party for the publishing industry this Saturday. We should all go, and I'd really like you to come with me." "You want me to be your date?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, if you're not in a relationship and you want to come." No, I'm not in a relationship." Yeah, I'd love to go with you," I stammered. "Great," he said, and handed me a copy of the invitation. "Here are all the details. Why don't I meet you in the lobby at 8 o'clock? I nodded because I seemed to be having trouble speaking. To hide my awkwardness, I glanced at my watch. Oh, wow, I have to get back to work. Alex nodded and started craning his neck to look for the waitress who was supposed to bring our check. But instead, the owner spotted him and approached our table. "It's not often we get a superhero lunch," he smiled. "Your lunch is on the house." Alex stood up and thanked him warmly. Then they hugged as is customary for men, and we headed for the door. "That was amazing," I said to Alex. "I've never seen a restaurant charge for lunch like that before." "You should go out with superheroes more often," he said with a wink. Alex walked me to the office, waving and nodding to strangers who spoke to him along the way. When we reached the front of the building, he said, Thanks for the great article and thanks for having lunch with me. Then, before I could respond, he leaned over and kissed me on the lips. As I stood there in surprise, he turned to leave. Don't forget about Saturday night, he said with a smile and then disappeared. What just happened? I asked myself, slowly walking back to my desk. All afternoon, I had a hard time concentrating on my work. On Saturday, I couldn't believe how nervous I was getting ready for the cocktail party. You're acting like you're getting ready for prom, I scolded myself. But then I remembered that I didn't actually go to prom because I didn't have a date. Anyway, I pulled out my best little black dress and black ankle straps with heels that were higher than I remembered. After examining myself in the mirror, I regretted for the 1,000th time that I hadn't gotten a little bigger on top, but I thought my legs looked pretty good, so I decided that would do just fine. Terry came in for a final check on me. She silently walked around me and then stopped in front of me, nodding approvingly. Have a good time, sweetheart, but take care of yourself, she said solemnly. Yes, fairy godmother, I said with a smirk. I promise I'll be home before midnight. She only shook her head, but I thought I saw a smile flicker across her face. The event was being held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and I splurged on a cab because I didn't want to sweat on the subway. When I entered the lobby, I didn't notice Alex at first, but then the crowd parted and he appeared, resplendent in his Superman costume. I assumed he'd wear a regular suit and tie or even a tuxedo for such an important event. But I figured that if he was brave enough to go in a suit, I might as well be brave enough to go with him. As soon as he spotted me, he immediately rushed over to us. I've never seen you in a dress before. You look amazing, he said. And even though I knew he was just being nice, it still made me feel good to hear him say it. We took the elevator up to the Empire Room, which was already crowded with a crowd of people busy eating, drinking, and socializing. However, when Alex and I entered the lounge, there was an instant buzz, and no sooner had we found something to drink than we were surrounded by people asking questions and making small talk. It was interesting to see how these supposedly sophisticated people reacted to Alex in his Superman costume, and I was once again amazed at how easily he interacted with complete strangers. But it would be nice if the two of us had the opportunity to spend some time alone. I guess that's what happens when you're around a celebrity, and I had to remind myself that I was at least partially responsible for his fame. At that moment, 3 people about our age ran up to us and started chatting animatedly with Alex, teasing him about what had happened at work. I held back so he could talk to his friends, but he wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me gently to him. Hello, everyone, he said. This is Elle Finn, my traveling companion. She is also the reporter who wrote the Times article. He turned to me. These are the people I told you about in my office. This is Jacob, Tommy, and Marie, he told me, introducing them one by one. When I shook hands with the 2 guys, I noticed that they both took the opportunity to check me out, and that pleased me. But when I shook Marie's hand, I thought I saw a hint of jealousy in her eyes. She was probably hoping Alex would ask her to go with him, I thought, and felt a slight smugness at the fact that I was the one in his arms. After a few more minutes of conversation, the 3 of them retreated to the appetizer table to refresh their plates, and I took the opportunity to pull Alex aside. So what was that about something big happening in your office? I asked. Gosh, I almost forgot to tell you the big news. Mrs. Grissom called me into her office today, and I was sure she was going to give me the axe. But instead, she said she liked the manuscript I gave her. She thinks it has great potential. That's great, Alex, said I excitedly. I can't believe it. Your gamble paid off. And that's not all, he continued. She told me she really admired my initiative and willingness to take risks. She said that was exactly the kind of senior editor they needed. So instead of being fired, I got a promotion and a big raise. Oh, Alex, congratulations, I exclaimed and hugged him. He responded to my hug, and it felt really good, until I suddenly felt him tense up. What's that? I asked. That's Glenda, my ex, he said in a low voice. She's coming this way. And that's Connor James with her. He's the guy she cheated with. Why are they here? I asked. I should have known she'd be here, but I didn't even think about it, he said. Her firm does a lot of legal work with the publishing business. I turned and saw a pretty blonde in an evening dress, accompanied by a man in a tuxedo. Her frowning face gave the impression that she had eaten something sour. She didn't wait for us to approach and spoke in an angry voice. I can't believe you showed up to an event like this in that stupid Halloween costume, Alex. You're making a complete fool of yourself. Alex folded his arms across his chest, and I noticed the tension in his posture. Why are you so upset, Glenda? Why do you care what I choose to wear? You look ridiculous in that padded suit, and I'm embarrassed to have you here like this amongst all these important people. Sorry to embarrass you, but I'm going to wear what I want whether you like it or not, Alex said, then added, and for your information, the suit has no lining. Reflexively, Glenda reached out and touched his bicep, then jerked it away in embarrassment when she realized what she'd done. Clearly trying to change the subject, she glanced at me. You have not introduced me to your little companion for this evening, she said wryly. I beg your pardon, he said in a sarcastic tone. Glenda Preston, let me introduce you to Elle Finn. This is the New York Times reporter who wrote the Sunday magazine article about me. She looked at me with a chuckle. How appropriate, she said. An associate editor at a publishing house and a reporter at a newspaper. Two losers from two dying industries. Then, before either of us could react, she grabbed her companion's arm and said loudly, Come on, Connor, let's get out of here. Alex started to stalk after her, but I grabbed his arm. Please don't make a scene, Alex, I begged. Who cares what she thinks? For a second, I thought he was going to pull away from me and go after her, but then his muscles relaxed. Okay, Elle, I'll leave it at that. She just has a way of getting to me. I've barely seen or talked to her since she left, and I thought she couldn't upset me anymore. And here in less than 2 minutes, she's insulting me and you, and there's nothing I can do about it. I didn't want to ask, but I couldn't resist voicing my concerns. Do you still have feelings for her, Alex? I asked. He was flabbergasted. Oh God, no. It's not that at all. I guess what makes me so upset is that she's the one who messed up. She's the one who lied and left me, and I'm the one who feels bad. And then all of a sudden she shows up tonight and acts like it's all my fault. And there's nothing I can do about it. It was clear that he was still hurt by what had happened, but I was relieved that he wasn't fixated on Glenda. I tried to divert his attention by talking about his work and my own. We stayed and chatted, I drank champagne, he drank sparkling water, and the two of us ate so many appetizers it would have been enough for an entire meal. We even went out on the floor and did a little dance, and we were both starting to feel better. Finally, Alex leaned over to me and said, I'm ready to go if you are. When I nodded, he walked me down the stairs and we got into a waiting cab. I can afford that more often now, he said with a slight smile. As we drove to my apartment, I thought about what had happened tonight. I liked Alex a lot and I admired him in many ways. At the same time, I realized that he was deeply hurt by what Glenda had done. He had told me this before, but tonight I had experienced firsthand that she still had the upper hand over him. What a bitch, I thought angrily and regretted that I couldn't do anything to help. I was beginning to feel very protective of this contradictory man who was both strong and weak. Perhaps because of this, or maybe just because a little of the courage from his Superman suit had transferred to me as well. When we reached my house, I asked him if he wanted to come upstairs for a bit. He looked at me triumphantly and replied, Yes, I really do. Unlocking the door to my darkened apartment, I whispered, My neighbor is probably asleep by now, so we'll have to be quiet. But when I reached for the light switch, his big hand covered mine to stop me. Then he lifted me up in his arms like I weighed nothing. Which one is your bedroom? He asked, and all I could do was point to it. Truth be told, that was exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd invited him in, but I hadn't expected him to read my mind so well and take charge so completely. But now I was glad he had. When I woke up in the morning, I reached for him, but his bed was empty. I felt annoyed at the thought of him sneaking out, but before I could start feeling sorry for myself, he reappeared in the doorway, and I realized he must have needed to go to the bathroom. I was relieved and happy when he crawled back under the sheet beside me and fell asleep again. We had a great night. After a while, I got up and took a quick shower before making coffee and starting breakfast. I heard the shower running again and figured he was awake too. Sure enough, he soon emerged, smiling gratefully at me when he smelled the food. I had just had time to set the table for him when my neighbor's door opened and she appeared in her robe and slippers. Alex, I said, this is my neighbor, Terry Feldman. Terry, this is Alex Stevenson. They shook hands, and after pouring herself a cup of coffee, she sat down and continued to stare at Alex so intently that he couldn't help but notice. "I guess you're not used to seeing someone in a Superman costume," he said good-naturedly. "No," she said. "I'm not used to seeing my neighbor bring home a man." Alex chuckled and I blushed with embarrassment. Sunday was rainy, and since Terry had to go out, I asked Alex if he could stay for a while. He agreed, and we spent the morning sitting on the couch reading the Sunday paper. I was beginning to feel warm and at home. There were alarm bells going off in my head, but I didn't pay attention to them because I was feeling so good. After a while, Alex put the paper aside and turned to me. "So what's the deal with your roommate?" "She seems a lot older than you." "Are you related?" "No," I laughed, "although sometimes she acts like my mother. She sort of adopted me at work, and when my ex-boyfriend kicked me out of his apartment, she offered to let me move in with her. Terry's been looking after me ever since." He nodded. After a couple more minutes, he spoke again. "I just realized you already know everything about me," he said. "How about you let me hear your story?" I poured myself another cup of coffee and began. Not much to tell. Growing up, I was something of a tomboy. Besides the fact that I was not attracted to women's things, I started getting fat late, so the boys in high school paid little attention to me. But that didn't bother me much because I got into writing. Instead of socializing, I went to work on the school newspaper and yearbook. By the time I got to college, I had a figure and some male students started hitting on me. But I was pretty shy due to my lack of experience, and most guys weren't patient enough to wait for me to get comfortable with them. Once again, I started spending most of my free time writing. In addition to the college paper, I tried to write the great American novel, unsuccessfully, it must be said. Although I didn't date much, I did have one pretty intense romance, but the guy broke my heart my senior year when he dumped me for someone else. When I graduated from college, I managed to get a job at my hometown newspaper. While I was working there, I did some reporting that earned me a good reputation. When I applied for a job at the Times, they apparently liked what I did because I got the job. When my then boyfriend dumped me, Terry took me under her wing, and that's pretty much my whole story. Alex and I spent all day at my apartment and ended up making love again. It was no worse than the first time. Eventually, he said he had to go home to get ready for work on Monday. As he left, he kissed me and said, "I'll call you." I hoped he meant it, but that's what my last beau said, and I never heard from him again. I really hoped Alex was sincere, especially since in many ways this was the best weekend of my life. I wasn't ready for it to be over. Terry got home a little later and gave me a careful look. "Well, I'll tell you what, he's definitely getting attention." When I didn't say anything, she gave me a hard look. "You really have it bad, don't you?" "I've never seen you treat a guy like that." "He's really special," I admitted, "but I still have a lot of doubts. It's so strange. I'm happier than ever, but at the same time I'm scared to death." She only shook her head. "If he hurts you, I'll make a contract with him." I knew she was joking, but I really appreciated her concern. She walked down the hall but then turned around. "Oh, and next time don't forget to use an air freshener. It stinks in here." I turned crimson. Monday night when I got home, no sooner had I closed the door than the phone rang. It was Alex, and he was so excited I could barely understand him. "Elle, you won't believe what happened tonight. The CBS people called. I'm going to be on the Letterman show tomorrow night." He revealed that he has been a huge fan of David's for years and couldn't believe he would be a guest on his idol's show. "Is your participation in the Letterman show going to be a problem for Mrs. Grissom?" I asked, but Alex assured me that there would be no problem with the publisher. "It's great publicity for them," he enthused. I promised him I would watch, as if I could do anything else. But after I hung up the phone, I was overcome with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was so happy about Alex's unexpected good fortune, and so glad that he had decided to call me to share the news. On the other hand, a nagging voice was asking if I liked the real Alex or just the man in the suit. Now that I thought about it, I realized that I had never seen him without a suit, except when we went to bed together. Then I suddenly began to wonder if the suit was a crutch he needed to get through life. I tried to brush off my doubts, but they wouldn't go away so easily. It's so like me to worry about good news. Needless to say, on Tuesday night, Terry and I settled in front of the TV just in time for the Letterman show to start. David's first guest was a pretty young pop singer in a very short skirt who performed her latest hit, and then sat down on the couch to chat with the host for a bit. Then, after a commercial break, David introduced the man everyone in New York City is talking about, the city's latest hero, Superman. The audience applauded as Alex came on stage, waved to the crowd, and then shook hands with David and the pop star. I held my breath, hoping Alex wouldn't do anything that would seem funny, but I needn't have worried. Despite his adoration for Letterman, Alex appeared relaxed and at ease with the conversation. He told the story of why he started wearing the suit, and then proceeded to tell the story of his run-in with a biker in a bar. This story drew an approving response from the audience. Responding to a few leading questions from David, Alex deftly gave self-deprecating answers that drew laughter and applause. It was obvious that even Letterman was impressed. The pop star, on the other hand, couldn't resist stroking Alex's biceps and making suggestive comments about him being a man of steel. "Show us your superpower," she persisted, even when Alex refused. But after she pleaded a third time, he winked at Letterman, then stood up, bent over and grabbed the squealing girl under her arms, easily spinning her in a large circle while revealing that she was wearing a thong. When he deftly sat her back down on the couch, she exclaimed, "Oh my God, that was amazing!" And the audience erupted in laughter and applause. Letterman, who never missed a cue, shouted out, "Ladies and gentlemen, Superman!" And the applause turned into a standing ovation. Alex turned and bowed to the singer, shook Letterman's hand again, and left the stage, waving to the audience who continued to applaud. Terry turned to me in amazement. "That's quite a performance. Are you sure it's never been on TV before?" "I don't think so," I said, but I was also shocked at how successful Alex's appearance had been. I was beginning to be convinced that the costume really was magic. The next day at work, I checked some of the Night Critics' blogs and saw that Alex's performance had generated a ton of approving comments. I tried to call him to congratulate him, but the line was busy every time, so I left him a voicemail. He didn't call back until the afternoon. "I'm sorry I didn't call you back sooner, Ella," he said, "but my phone has been ringing off the hook all day. And listen, I got a call from the William Morris Agency. They want to represent me. They think I have show business potential." "Really?" "That's incredible, Alex," I said. "What did you tell them?" "Well, I told them I wanted to think about it. It would mean I'd have to quit my job here. But the guy said he thought they could get me on a lot of shows and appearances, and that could bring in a lot of money. He even hinted that they could make a deal with Hollywood to make a movie." The whining voice I'd heard before was now screaming at me, but I tried to keep my fears out of my voice. "Oh, Alex, I'm so happy for you. Everything seems to be working out just fine." "I know," he said, "but I don't want to rush into it and make a decision I'll regret later." He grinned crookedly. "I already did that once with Glenda." I offered to help him in any way I could, but then he got a phone call and had to disconnect. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," he promised. When I got home that evening, I felt strangely depressed. I had rejoiced at Alex's success, but all I could see was him wearing that Superman suit for years to come. What kind of future could he and I have if he went on a talk show or worse, Hollywood? I felt like he cared about me, but I could see that I was becoming nothing more than a footnote in his story. The hopeful side of me kept begging me not to get ahead of myself, but the pessimist in me was saying that trouble was already here and looming on my doorstep. Writing is one way to relax, but that night I couldn't find the energy to do even that. Terry poked her head through the door and demanded to know what was bothering me, so I tearfully told her my fears. "As far as I'm concerned," Terry said, "the real problem is this Glenda woman. She's his kryptonite. He can't stop wearing the suit because she's still capable of doing him harm. Do you want me to put a contract on her?" I laughed and escorted her out of my room. 2 days later, I was working on a routine task in my office when a coworker walked up to me and caught my eye. "Hey, Elle, aren't you the one dating Superman?" When I blushed and admitted that we had met, he pointed to my computer and said, "Look in Gawker today. There's an article that mentions him." When I first looked at the news and gossip blog, I didn't see the story because I was looking for Alex's picture, but upon looking again, I found it. Under the headline, "Woman Who Broke Superman's Heart," was a picture of a woman angrily pacing the street, trying to fight off the camera. I suddenly realized it was Glenda Preston, Alex's ex-wife. According to the reporter, who clearly sympathized with Alex, everyone in New York is asking who hurt Superman so badly. She then revealed in an exclusive Gawker piece the whole story of Glenda cheating on Alex with attorney Connor James for months before finally dumping Alex. There were enough juicy details to realize that someone in the know had ratted Glenda out. I immediately tried to call Alex, but again I couldn't get through. He didn't call me that night either, which made me even more wary, and I decided not to bother him. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I could feel the distance between us growing, and the courage I was beginning to feel when I was with him seemed to be dissipating. One of the things we do regularly at the paper is check out what our competitors are publishing. Of course, we at the Times don't recognize that we have competitors, but we still check other news outlets just in case. To make matters worse, on this day I was checking the Daily News, which the folks at the Times don't even recognize as a legitimate newspaper. However, as I was browsing through the New York section, an article titled "Ex-Superman Got the Axe" caught my eye. Of course, the article breathlessly recounted how Glenda Preston had been relieved of her duties at the law firm Dennison and Lauser, and that Connor James, whom the article dubbed her paramour, had also left under the radar. A senior partner at Dennison and Lauser said their behavior during office hours dishonored the firm's good name, as if a law firm has a good name. But I remembered how she had behaved to me at the cocktail party, and was glad that there was some justice in the world after all. This time, when I called Alex, I was surprised to get through to him. When I started to tell him about the Daily News article, he interrupted me. "Oh yeah," he said. "I heard every word because Glenda called and told me about it herself. She grilled me from head to toe, accusing me of planting the story. Even when I pointed out details I couldn't possibly know, she still refused to believe I wasn't behind it." "So, what do you think about it?" I asked. "I think I'm still digesting it all," he said. "It all happened so fast and I don't know what to make of it." He paused as if trying to make a decision. Finally, he continued. "Elle, this week has been the craziest week of my life, and I need to talk to you about something. Would you mind meeting me Saturday afternoon at the Central Park Zoo?" When I agreed, we arranged a time, and then he called. As I hung up the phone, I felt encouraged that he wanted to talk to me about his life. But after a while, my doubts began to grow, and by evening I needed to discuss them with Terry. She understood my concerns about Alex and even offered additional reasons why I should be extra cautious. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said. "I want to know," I told her, "why he wants to meet me at the zoo. What's the big deal?" She was on top of him in a flash. "It's the kids," she said. "It's always full of kids, and I'm willing to bet he wants to run his Superman act with them. Maybe he's even got some media to film him in action." My heart clenched. Now it all made sense. This was supposed to be the opening of his new career in show business. I hoped it would work out the way he wanted, but I knew that wasn't the case for me at all. I wanted to be his girlfriend, not a prop in an Alex and Superman show. I hate to admit it, but I shed a few tears that night after I went to bed. I almost didn't go the next day, but Terry insisted. "Look, at least he had the decency to tell you everything to your face. Do him the courtesy of listening to his story, even though it may not be the one you want to hear. Who knows, it might be something else entirely." I knew she was right, so I tried to calm my fears and headed for the park. I took the F train at 57th and 6th Streets, then walked around the pond and down East Drive until I was at the entrance to the zoo. There was a cluster of laughing and playing children near the ticket booth, and I fully expected to see Alex entertaining them. But his red and blue suit was nowhere to be seen. After buying my ticket, I walked to the main entrance, but still couldn't spot him and found a shady spot to wait. As I sat there and thought about what had happened, I noticed a man in jeans and a t-shirt walking in my direction. When he stopped right in front of me, I was startled. "Alex," I squeaked in surprise, "is that you?" I didn't even recognize him. I had already thought out the whole conversation, but now that he appeared in civilian clothes, I couldn't think of what to say. As we walked towards the center of the zoo, I muttered, "I don't think I've ever seen you when you weren't in your Superman costume." "Are you disappointed?" he asked, and there was a note of concern in his voice that surprised me. "No, it's not that," I said. "It's just that I expected to see you playing with the kids and your alter ego." "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," he said, as we approached the sea lion pool. We stopped at the railing to watch the playful creatures swim and bark for a minute, and then he led me over to a bench. He was silent for so long that I couldn't stand it. "So what's going on, Alex?" I asked, trying not to sound too alarmed. Why aren't you wearing a suit? He turned to look at me, and I thought there was a flicker of apprehension in his eyes again. You know I started wearing the suit because of Glenda. I was devastated by her leaving and humiliated that she made me a cuckold. I know it was crazy, but the thing is, the suit seemed to help. I didn't feel so vulnerable when I wore it, and it helped me get my confidence back. I started exercising and quit drinking, and that's been good for me too. Then came all this fame, and things started happening really fast. I got promoted at work when I took the manuscript to my boss. Then I got on the Letterman show, and now I have people who want me to go to Hollywood. He reached out and took my hand. But the best thing that's happened to me out of all of this is meeting you, he said quietly. My breath caught, and my hopes started to rise, but he shattered them with his next words. But now I have a problem, and I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I don't understand, Alex. The thing is, I started wearing this costume to protect myself from humiliation. But now that everyone knows the real story, it was she who was humiliated. She can no longer hurt me, and now she has to suffer the consequences of her actions. As a result, I no longer feel the need to wear the suit. I was encouraged by his words, but couldn't ignore the implications. But Alex, if you stop wearing the suit, it means you'll miss out on the opportunities the agent talked about. You could be giving up real fame and fortune. Maybe, he said, but it's not who I am, not who I want to be. And that scares me. He looked intently into my eyes. Would you be disappointed if I gave it all up? Would you still be interested in me if I wasn't Superman anymore? Oh, Alex! I screamed and threw myself into his arms, kissing him wildly and crying at the same time. When I finally calmed down, he held me at arm's length and bestowed his gorgeous smile. I guess that means you're okay with it. Behind us, the seals started barking and clapping, and we both had to laugh. As we walked toward the subway, I tried to tell him how happy I was about his decision, and how impressed I was with all the changes that had happened to him since Glenda had left him. Wearing the suit was a little weird, I admitted, but it was what you needed to get to the level you're at now, and I'm okay with that. When we got to my apartment, Terry was already waiting with her hands on her hips and a stern expression on her face. But when she saw the two of us together, she relaxed and smiled. Looks like it went okay, she said, and walked over to me for a hug. Then she turned to Alex. You better treat her right, Superman, or I'll be looking for you. But she said it with a satisfied smile, and Alex leaned over and hugged her and promised that she would. Okay, Terry said. I have to go meet some friends, and you two look like you could use some privacy. Reaching the door, she turned around to look at me. Don't forget, she said. The air freshener is in the closet. With those words, she walked out, leaving me blushing. Alex came over and put his arm around my shoulders. She really cares about you, doesn't she? He said. Like I said, she's more like my guardian angel than my roommate, I told him. She can be a little annoying sometimes, but it's nice to know she's got my back. When the two young men left for Elle's bedroom, Terry walked down the sun-drenched sidewalk until she came to a small sidewalk cafe. When she noticed her two friends waiting at a table, she waved and asked the waiter to bring her a drink. Well, said one of the women, don't keep us in suspense. Did it work out as you hoped? Yes, exulted Terry, waving her fists triumphantly. I finally got Alex out of his Superman costume, and it's just the two of them. They're already back at the apartment, and from the way they looked at each other, they're going to be together for a long time. The other woman shook her head admiringly. I have to hand it to you, Terry. You have a flair. Terry lowered her eyes with obvious false modesty. That's all right, she said. Of course, I wasn't sure about the boy for a while. When I first saw him in that costume, I thought he was crazy, a mesh eugener. But Ella was clearly fascinated by him, and as I learned more about him, I realized that he was a good man who had been badly hurt by the bitch he married. Even though they divorced, it became clear to me that she was still a bad influence on him. I decided that if I wanted to bring Elle and him together, I had to do something to break that curse. The other friend leaned forward. So how did you do it? Well, Terry continued, I had a little help. My sister works at the same law firm as that bitch, and she gave me information about what was going on over there. All I had to do was call a blogger I know at Gawker and tell her the best part. When the story broke, That was all it took to expose the ex-wife and give her what she deserved. Once that happened, Alex was freed from her curse, just as I had envisioned. Perfect! Her friend exclaimed. You think that's a good thing? Terry smugly continued. Wait until you hear what else I've done for Ella. Well, said the second woman, come on. What have you done? Terry reached into her bulky purse and pulled out a stack of papers. What is it? The first woman asked. It's a book contract for Elle, declared Terry triumphantly. She never believed she was good enough, but I knew better. So I took a copy of her manuscript, pretended to be her agent, and sent it to a publishing house. Of course, they offered her a contract. She winked at the other ladies. Maybe this will turn out to be my wedding present for her. The second woman shook her head admiringly and raised her glass. I nominate Terry Feldman for Yente of the Year. All three women laughed and drained their glasses. Terry looked at her friends and smiled. I don't know about that, but I know one thing, she said. If you want to accomplish something, you don't need a costume or superpowers to do it. All you need is a little chutzpah. That's it! Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.